Hello, I'm Caitlin Kiernan. Thank you for watching my presentation, Language, Attitudes, and Ideologies in Finnish America. My research examines how Finnish Americans perceive Finnishness, including the language. This is done through interviews conducted in the upper Midwest of the United States. This study is significant as it examines the shifting attitudes towards Finnishness among successive generations of Finnish Americans. The way that young, multi generational Finnish Americans engage with their Finnish heritage is different of those in the past, many of whom grew up speaking Finn, hearing it at church, or maybe even reading it in the local newspaper published in Finnish, like Työmies. An additional part of this project is highlighting stories on a social media account, where parts of interviews focused on individual stories as opposed to attitudes are shared on social media with the permission of consultants, ensuring that this work reaches beyond academic circles. The predominance of Finnish ancestry and why this region is chosen for this research is demonstrated by the intensity of turquoise and green concentrated in the upper Midwest on the map. This area has a history of migration from Finland, specifically in the early 1900s. Pictures on the right give you an idea of how Finnish is displayed both outwardly and in one's home. From a social linguistic perspective, this research explores language attitudes and ideologies obtained through in depth, semi structured interviews, as well as participant observation, building on the research of scholars within this area of Finnish as a heritage language in the past. These methods were made possible through a 5-week field visit that brought me to the red points on the map, primarily in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and in Minnesota, where I was able to interview 34 people ages 18 to 94. A few findings from my preliminary analysis. So, the first thing I want to highlight is this language purism that comes from the pronunciation of words. This was almost unanimous in all of my interviews. It's not sauna, it's sauna. It's not sisu, it's sisu. And that interviewees um, had an idea of how it's pronounced, and that's an identifier of their cultural identity. As well, there's association with stereotypes of Yooper and Ranger talk. So Yoopers are those who live in the Upper Peninsula, and Ranger talk is that which is uh, used in the Iron Range of Minnesota. So there are stereotypes that came to the surface in my interviews towards these speech varieties, in the idea that they're influenced by languages and immigrants like Finns with Finnish. Additionally, there's in the interviews, it came to light that there's an idea that non-Finnish members of society associate Finns with branches of Lestadianism. This is something I hope to look into more when I further my analysis. And lastly, looking at the generational differences, as I said, a prime point of this work. Older Finns were self-conscious towards their Finnish, claiming that it was Finglish, as well as, an old Finnish, not modern or contemporary. And then they also had there's a term Finlander that is a pejorative term that they know that their parents, you would never use that. And maybe younger Finns, most of them might not even know about this term and the difference. It's becoming more popular using Finlander. And then younger generations express concerns about commodification of Finnish and individuals without Finnish heritage, benefiting or profiting off of the use of it in areas where it has a cultural value and capital. And then lastly, across generations and regions, there's this idea of, who is more Finnish, especially recently with the loss of the Finlandia University and where the Heritage Center should be. It's a big discussion that came up in interviews. And then concluding, while the attitudes towards Finnish and Finnishness tend to be rather positive, there's more behind the surface that needs to be examined, and I hope to look at this further while this project goes on. However, what these findings indicate now is that there's ideas of language, purist language ideology and ideologies regarding cultural and linguistic authenticity, who can use it and how, and then also uneducated speech, like the Yooper speech and Ranger talk that has an association with Finnishness. And lastly, future research could expand to include those without a Finnish identity who do not identify as Finn and see how they perceive this. And then lastly, it would be interesting to go to churches and interview more people from a wider religious background and see how they perceive this association of Finns with Lestadianism. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing your questions.